That sound you just heard has been played in Swedish villages for over 600 years. It has the strings of a violin, the keys of a piano, and sympathetic strings that ring out on their own, strings you never even touch. Most people have never heard of it. Sweden prints it on their money. Every culture made music. Most of it disappeared. Welcome back to Forgotten Folk Sounds. Last episode, we found the hurdy-gurdy, the medieval instrument that plays like an entire folk band in your hands. Today, we travel north, to the forests and farmlands of Sweden's Uppsala region, to an instrument so deeply embedded in Swedish identity that when the country redesigned its currency, they put the Nyckelharpa on it. The Nyckelharpa, the keyed fiddle, Sweden's best-kept musical secret. Let's start at the very beginning. The year is approximately 1350 AD. On the Swedish island of Gotland, a stonemason carves a relief into the gate of Kellunga Church. In the carving, two figures playing a strange, stringed instrument with keys along the side. That carving is the oldest known depiction of the Nyckelharpa, and it is already, in that image, clearly a fully formed instrument. Which means the instrument almost certainly existed well before 1350. How much before? Nobody knows. Its origins, though debated, seem to date back to at least the middle of the 14th century. Documentation of its use and existence appear in church paintings, early books on music, and relief sculptures for several hundred years. What's remarkable is how far that evidence spreads. Church frescoes in Italy from 1408 show angels playing what appears to be a Nyckelharpa. Church paintings in Denmark, references in German musical treatises. For a brief period in the 14th and 15th centuries, this instrument existed across much of Europe. And then, across most of Europe, it disappeared, replaced by the violin, which was cheaper, more portable, and more versatile. Except in one place. In northern Uppland in Sweden, the Nyckelharpa survived. Built and played by farmers and craftspeople, it became the most common instrument in the region, played at dances and in ceremonies and rituals. For the next 3 centuries, while the rest of Europe forgot it existed, the Nyckelharpa lived on in Swedish villages, passed from parent to child, farmer to farmer, generation to generation. Sweden didn't just preserve it, Sweden made it their own. In the 19th century, the Nyckelharpa became a refined instrument, played in concerts in Stockholm. By the 20th century, it had established itself as a symbol of Swedish folk music, and is today considered by many to be Sweden's most typical national instrument. Now, how does it actually work? Because this is where it gets genuinely extraordinary. The Nyckelharpa looks at first glance like a violin that had an identity crisis. It's held horizontally, strapped around the neck. You bow it like a violin. But along the neck sits a row, actually several rows, of wooden keys that stick out to the side. When you press a key, a small wooden tangent rises and touches the string, shortening it, changing the pitch. Exactly like pressing a fret on a guitar, except you do it with these piano-style keys instead. The modern instrument has 16 strings and 37 keys. It has 12 sympathetic strings, 1 drone string, and 3 melody strings. That word, sympathetic strings, is the secret to the Nyckelharpa's sound. Sympathetic strings are strings you never bow, never touch. They hang freely inside the instrument, tuned to specific pitches, and when you play a note nearby, they vibrate on their own, silently resonating. adding a halo of overtones to every note you play. The effect is unlike any other folk instrument on Earth. The sound is warm, but shimmering, full but delicate. It fills a room the way a much larger instrument would, from a box you can hold in your arms. The bow itself is short and curved, almost more like a Baroque bow than a modern violin bow. The technique takes time to develop, but players who master it describe the Nyckelharpa as one of the most expressive instruments they've ever played. It is, in short, a violin, a harp, and a keyboard in one. To understand what the Nyckelharpa means to Sweden, you have to understand what folk music means to Sweden. Sweden has one of the richest, most documented folk music traditions in the world. Not just the songs, the culture around them. The spellmen, the folk fiddlers, were respected figures in their communities, keepers of history, storytellers through music. And the Nyckelharpa was their instrument of choice. The music played on the Nyckelharpa, polskas, waltzes, marches, was the soundtrack of Swedish rural life for centuries. Births, weddings, harvests, funerals, every major moment in a community's life was marked by a spellman with a Nyckelharpa. Today, an estimated 8,000 Swedes play the modern chromatic Nyckelharpa, and there are approximately 25,000 Nyckelharpas in Sweden. For context, Sweden has a population of about 10 million people. That's one Nyckelharpa for every 400 Swedes. The instrument is so deeply embedded in national identity that it appears on the printed Swedish kronor, the national currency. Not a flag, not a king, an instrument. That is a culture that knows what it values. But here's the part that almost ended the story entirely. By the mid-1900s, interest in traditional folk instruments had waned significantly, leading to a dramatic decline in the Nyckelharpa's popularity. A revival began in the late 1950s, when Swedish authorities recognized the need to preserve this cultural heritage. The turning point came from one man. August Bolin, a farmer and instrument builder from Uppland, had spent his life refusing to let the Nyckelharpa die. He played it. He built them. He taught anyone who would listen. Then, in the 1960s, a young man named Erik Sahlström discovered Bolin's work. Erik was a great player and composed many tunes. He was very insightful at the beginning of the 1970s folk music revival and started courses on building for other teachers. These teachers then went back home and taught how to build and play, resulting in there being about 25,000 Nyckelharpas in Sweden today. Sahlström didn't just preserve the instrument, he modernized it, adding chromatic keys that gave players more musical range than ever before. The revival wasn't just Swedish. In the 1980s, the Nyckelharpa was rediscovered by Italian musician Marco Ambrosini, who introduced it to the realm of early and contemporary music. Since then, it has gained popularity in Italy and other countries. Today, the primary objective of the Nyckelharpa network, which has been recognized by UNESCO for its role in safeguarding living heritage, is to protect the tradition through building, playing, dancing, and supporting documentation and research. The Nyckelharpa came within a generation of disappearing entirely. It didn't. And the reason it didn't tells you something important about what it takes to save a musical tradition. It takes one person who refuses to let it go. So, where do you go from here? Finding a Nyckelharpa outside Scandinavia is harder than finding a hurdy-gurdy, but not impossible. Quality instruments from Swedish and German makers range from around $1,500 to $4,000. A handful of builders in the United States now make them as well. The American Nyckelharpa Association, the ANA, is the best single starting point for English-speaking players. They maintain a list of teachers, a database of builders, and organize workshops and camps specifically for beginners. Learning it. Players with violin or fiddle backgrounds typically progress faster because the bowing technique is similar, but many players come in with no string background at all. The keys make the finger work more accessible than a fretless instrument. You don't need years of ear training to find the right pitch. The keys do that for you. The folk music community around the Nyckelharpa is notably welcoming. The instrument was nearly lost once. The people who play it tend to understand what that means, and they want more players, not fewer. There are also online courses now, taught by Swedish masters, that didn't exist even 5 years ago. The pandemic pushed a lot of traditional music teachers online, and many of them stayed there. If you're in Europe, the annual summer courses held in Uppsala, Sweden, are considered the gold standard. Week-long intensive workshops where you can learn from the people who kept this tradition alive. The Nyckelharpa is not a beginner's weekend project, but it rewards patience in a way very few instruments do. Players describe a sound that seems to come from somewhere deeper than the wood. Maybe that's 600 years of music talking. The Nyckelharpa survived something most instruments don't, being almost completely forgotten by the culture that created it. It survived because of a small number of farmers, craftspeople, and teachers who decided that some sounds were worth protecting, even when the world wasn't listening. Every culture made music. Most of it disappeared. The Nyckelharpa almost did. It didn't. Next episode, we're heading to West Africa for an instrument that predates the banjo, the guitar, and possibly most of the folk music you've ever heard, the accounting, and the argument that it changed the history of American music. If you want to catch that, subscribe. And if you know someone who loves music history, Scandinavian culture, or just sounds that shouldn't exist, share this with them. See you in the next Lost Sound.